meeting today, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Mathan Ravid, who is currently undertaking an internship at the Stephen Roth Institute in Tel Aviv University, and he accepted on our pleasure the invitation to come to address us on an issue called Anti-Zionist movement, which is a clearly anti-Jewish agenda in Sweden, and it's headed by the Swedish poet and essayist Mohamed Omar. Mathan has a BA from Tel Aviv University in Sweden, and his fields are history and the history of religions. And he had done research on anti-Semitism and the Swedish press in relation to Nazi Germany. And we also had the pleasure to publish a few articles of Mathan's here at the JCT in the past before. So Mathan is going to speak about half an hour on this subject, and then we'll have time for your comments and questions.
Thank you. Let's start by thanking Thomas and Manfred for inviting me and for all the help I've gotten earlier with the publications. I'm happy to be here. Today I will talk about the new so-called anti-Zionist movement in Sweden with a clearly anti-Jewish agenda, which the Swedish poet and Islamist Mohamed Omar has been trying to build up during the last 18 months. This is, by the way, Mohamed Omar on the picture on the right side, holding a speech at a demonstration in Stockholm. Firstly, I will focus on the way in which Mohamed Omar has been trying to convey his message both locally in his hometown of Uppsala and as widely as possible on the internet. My second focus will be on the individuals and groups with which he has been cooperating during the last 18 months. And in the end, I will say a few words about the future. But let us start by taking a look at Mohamed Omar himself and some of the views on him in Swedish mainstream press. Let's see how. Mohamed Omar has for a few years now been seen as an esteemed poet, author and intellectual who has been published in many leading Swedish newspapers, including the liberal Dagens Nyheter, which is the leading morning paper in Sweden, Sydsvenskan, which is the leading morning paper in the south of Sweden, and Uppsala Nya Tidning, which is the leading liberal newspaper in the area where he lives. In addition to this, he's been a frequent guest on Swedish public radio and on Swedish public television. He has often been seen as a moderate Muslim, preaching a message of coexistence and tolerance, condemning extremism and radicalization. And again, against this backdrop, many were surprised, if not say shocked, when he, in January of 2009, in an article published in the Swedish liberal newspaper Expressen, came out as an Islamist. He blamed this decision on Israeli warfare in Gaza at the turn of 2008-2009. And this sudden turn may make sense per se, but against the backdrop of some of the views he has expressed afterwards, one has quite a problem believing that it was actually the Jewish state which made him become an Islamist. In later publications, he has, for example, strongly condemned homosexuality and feminism, calling them diseases to which Islam is the cure. He has been frequently glorifying organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian regime. As for the Jewish dimension, he has stated that he does not like Judaism, and he has questioned whether it's possible to be both a Jew and an honorable person at the same time. He has also claimed that Israel or so-called Zionists were behind the September 11th attacks and the London bombings. And as for Sweden, he has said that Sweden is controlled by socialist Zionism. He has also accused members of parliament, the anti-racist magazine Expo, as well as Amnesty in Sweden, of being controlled by Zionists. In addition to this, he has also stated that mass immigration to Sweden is in fact a Jewish plot in order to benefit the Jews financially. Unclear exactly how.
Of Arabs, I don't understand. What kind of immigration?
mass immigration in general.
To Sweden, but only
Yes.
Arabs come to Sweden.
That's right.
So
That's what he
it's also a plot.
Mass immigration, that's what he said, yes.
I don't understand.
He has also stated that he believes in Islamic missionary activity and that there's a problematic lack of Islamists in Sweden. And being the self-proclaimed spearhead of the Swedish Islamism, one would assume that he would concentrate on changing that fact. But if you take a closer look at what is written and said during the last 18 months, the Jews seem to be at least as important as the Muslims for Mohamed Omar. One example of this is the new so-called Anti-Zionist party, which he, in November 2009, publicly announced the impending forming of. And here it's important to point out that he pointed out that it's not an Islamist party, but just an anti-Zionist party, which will solely focus on anti-Zionism. He also claimed that it would be formed soon, but some 8 months later, in June of 2010, he all of a sudden announced on his homepage that party politics would have to wait because he, among other things, wanted to focus on his own writing. That being said, he has not given up his dream of influencing Swedish society in an Islamist way, and some of the structures which he's been trying to build up in order to accomplish this are already visible. All these notions which he has expressed has not surprisingly made him somewhat of a persona non grata in Swedish mainstream society and within the Swedish mainstream press. Almost all public figures have strongly condemned Mohamed Omar. Racist watchdogs such as the already mentioned magazine Expo and members of the Swedish Committee Against Anti-Semitism have frequently monitored and condemned his propaganda. And today Mohamed Omar is not anymore being published in leading Swedish newspapers. Which, a fact, of course, which has forced him to find other channels to convey his message. And we will take a look at them now. Omar stated that until his so-called anti-Zionist party is formed, the whole endeavor should be seen as the new anti-Zionist movement in Uppsala. And accordingly, Uppsala, his hometown, located some 70 kilometers north of Stockholm, is also the place where he has been most active. One example of this is the study circle which he has started, and it's named after the Swedish painter and convert to Islam Ivan Ageli, which has the official aim to create an intellectually stimulating environment for young Muslims, offering them an alternative form of integration into what he calls the Swedish dissident culture. This study circle regularly offers lectures with known anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers, and I will come back to this in a short while. Another example of his local activities is the Islamic publishing house Ageli, which Omar and some unnamed friends started in the summer of 2009. Its official aim, one of its aims, but it's maybe the most important one, is to counterbalance what Omar calls Zionist-controlled leading Swedish publishing houses. And it's portrayed as a needed weapon in the daring Muslim fight against what he calls the heresies of the modern era. Atheism, liberalism, hedonism, Darwinism, feminism, gender science, and what he calls faggot loveism. On its website, it's announced that they are planning to publish a lot of so-called traditionalists, as well as Islamists such as Ayatollah Khomeini and Hassan al-Banna. However, the only book yet to have been published is Omar's own newly written biography, The Islamist. In addition to this, Omar has been trying to spread his message as widely as possible on the internet. One example of various groups which he has created on the internet community Facebook. One of them is called the Friends of Mohamed Omar, and was formerly known as the Friends of the Uppsala Mosque, since Mohamed Omar initially was planning on holding a series of lectures in the main mosque of Uppsala. After the spokespersons of the mosque officially went out and distanced themselves from Omar and his colleagues, he was forced to find another venue and another name. Today it's called, as I said, the Friends of Mohamed Omar. It's mainly a group through which he can promote his lectures at the study circle, and it has about 250 members, so as I speak. A somewhat bigger group was the Anti-Zionist party, which was named after the party which Omar was planning on forming. And it was described as a political party that works for democracy through counteracting Zionist domination over culture, politics, and media. When this group, for unknown reasons, stopped functioning in May of 2010, it had around 650 members, of which at least one Omar would surely describe as an Israeli agent. It could be interesting to point out here that in Sweden, it's needed a minimum of 1,500 signatures to be able to form a political party. And judging by these numbers, Omar could still have a way to go. Let's see. Another example, the main sources of Mohamed Omar's propaganda is his homepage and his blog. Here one can find, among other things, articles and movie clips, book reviews, and interviews with internationally famous figures and Swedish ones. And these interviews can best be described as endless monologues where the so-called interviewed freely can express her, or more commonly his, propaganda with any critical questions. Published, promoted, or interviewed people, internationally known figures, include the American 9/11 conspiracy theorist David Griffin, the British anti-Semite Gilad Atzmon, and the French Holocaust denier Robert Faurisson. An analysis of his blog and his homepage is probably also the best way in which to get some kind of a picture of which individuals or groups he has been cooperating with. And we will start by taking a closer look at his inner circle of associates. One of them is Lars Wilhelmsson. Lars Wilhelmsson is a former member of the Swedish branch of the European Jews for Just Peace, as well as the Palestine Solidarity Association of Sweden. Wilhelmsson was born a Jew and was long a Marxist, but nowadays he calls himself neither a Marxist nor a Jew, but a politically and ideologically independent humanist who regards Israel and Zionism as the biggest threats to humanity. He has, since 2004, I think, been a representative of the Alhambra publishing house, which, among other things, has published books questioning the so-called mainstream conception of who was behind the 9/11 attacks. One interesting thing with Wilhelmsson is the former Marxist Wilhelmsson is that he quite often portrays Zionism as an imperialistic worldwide power which occupies the Western world. Of course, these are notions which emanate from Stalinist propaganda in the 40s and in the beginning of the 50s. I mentioned earlier that he was born a Jew, and this would maybe not have been of such a big interest had Mohamed Omar not regularly used Wilhelmsson as a proof that he is in fact not an anti-Semite, but merely what he calls a critic of Zionism. That being said, it should be pointed out that Wilhelmsson is probably his most important associate. He contributes with a lot of articles on Omar's websites. He holds a lot of lectures, and he has even accompanied Omar on trips to the Arab world. Omar describes Wilhelmsson as one of Sweden's leading experts on science. second person vital to Mohamed Omar's network is Lars Abelskog. He's the former editor-in-chief of the conspiracy theoretical journal Nexus Nya Tider, which frequently published articles claiming that some sort of foreign power or maybe even a world government was withholding information from the public. He is a non-Holocaust denier and a former leader of various anti-Semitic sects. On his website, he contributes with articles, and he is a frequent lecturer at the study circle. He is, by the way, the second from the right. This is a picture taken after one of his lectures at the study circle. Mohamed Omar is the one in the middle, and the three other persons are the guests who attended the lecture. He has also long worked as a translator, and on Mohamed Omar's website he has, among other things, translated the infamous anti-Semitic pamphlet, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Omar's admiration of Abelskog is obvious, and he has described his much older colleague as a leading expert on the mythic notion of the Holocaust, one of Sweden's most intelligent people, and a mentor.
Can I just ask about his surname? It's not a Swedish name.
Lars.
No.
Sorry. Surname.
Very Swedish.
It's,
Very
I would say it's
Swedish.
very Swedish, but not so common. Last but not least, a third person vital for Mohamed Omar's movement or network, or what you want to call it, is Ahmed Rami. He's born in Morocco and has lived in Sweden since the 1970s. He, of course, became famous or infamous in the end of the 1980s when he founded the local radio station Radio Islam, which soon turned out to be a vehicle for anti-Semitic propaganda. Then, some 20 years ago, Rami warned that the Jewish power in Sweden is like a cancer, to which the body of Swedish society has no cure. And today, 20 years later, he's claiming, among other things, that Jews are mentally ill and they are occupying not only Palestine, but the entire world. Rami was convicted of hate speech in 1989. 7 years later, though, in 1996, he established the Radio Islam website, which still today is containing the same anti-Semitic propaganda. It's been translated to 36 languages, and some of his long and strong ties to this Swedish extreme right can be seen in that very homepage. He is a frequent lecturer at the study circle, and he's often been interviewed by Omar on his websites. Omar, of course, has portrayed Radio Islam as probably the most fact-filled and the best anti-Zionist homepage in Sweden. He has described Rami as one of few Swedish Muslim intellectuals, a pioneer and a former political prisoner. These three individuals, Wilhelmsson, Abelskog, and Rami, appear to be, at least, by far Omar's most important associates, and they can be described as his inner circle of contacts. They are also likely to have introduced Omar to some of his other contacts, the outer circle of contacts, and we'll now take a look at some of them. Should be added that they have this outer circle of contacts hold direct or indirect links to these three. Here I would just like to point out again that most Swedish public figures have strongly condemned Mohamed Omar, and most people have distanced themselves from Mohamed Omar. He is not any longer being published in leading newspapers. However, a number of individuals have been attracted by his message, and they can roughly be divided into 5 different groups. The first of these is Swedish Muslims and Islamists. This includes a couple of Stockholm-based Swedish imams, not known to the broader public, which have contributed with articles, and one of them, his name is Ahmad Valsa, has even lectured at the Study Circle at one time. One more famous, more known individual and perhaps more interesting is Mahmoud al-Debe, which is the chairman of the Muslim Association of Sweden, which is the largest organization within the Swedish Muslim Council. He agreed to be interviewed by Mohamed Omar on one of his websites at a time when Omar's views on democracy and homosexuality and Jews were long known. Unfortunately, his position is not very surprising. Already before this interview, Mahmoud al-Debe had gone out in public criticizing the criticism which Omar had endured, calling it a registration of opinions, which is illegal in Sweden. It should be pointed out that Mahmoud al-Debe did not echo Mohamed Omar's propaganda in the interview itself, but he does not seem to have had big problems finding other younger Muslims which are willing to do so openly. Therefore, one could find articles on his homepage and his blog by young Islamists condemning, among other things, feminism and advocating a criminalization of homosexuality. Such homophobic positions, which Omar also has expressed, of course, has also attracted other groups. One relatively small group, but still, is Christian conservatives, and including a couple of Catholic Swedish theologians who have, in the same way, condemned liberal modern society, claiming that gay rights are a step in the wrong direction, and describing the Enlightenment as a step backwards and something which is endangering European culture. One more known figure, which is not a Catholic, but which has appeared on Mohamed Omar's blog and his homepage, is the Pentecostal preacher Åke Gren. Åke Gren, as some of you may already know, was convicted in 2004 for hate speech after he had compared homosexuality to a cancer on the body of Swedish society. He was acquitted 1 year later, but in an interview on Mohamed Omar's homepage, he expressed more or less the same views, saying that homosexuality was a burden on Swedish society and that no one had the democratic right to live as a homosexual. Third larger group, which have been attracted by Omar's message, are a number of left-wing radicals. One of them is Jan Myrdal, as some of you also might know. Myrdal has long been seen as the informal leader of Swedish Maoism. He was one of the founders of the then Maoist, now socialist journal Folket Bild Kulturfront.
He's the son of Wilhelm Myrdal.
Yes, exactly, son of Wilhelm Myrdal. Myrdal was also one of the so-called intellectuals who defended Ahmed Rami at his trials in the end of the 80s. And his views on the Jewish state and the Jewish people inhabiting it are quite strong and mostly negative. He has on Omar's homepage, among other things, demonized Israel by equating it to Nazi Germany, only to in the same time, in the same interview, claim that large parts, unclear exactly which, of the German National Socialist program were, quote, reasonable. Another figure which has appeared quite a lot on Mohamed Omar's homepage and blog is the known anti-Semite Israel Shamir. He's one of Omar's columnists, and he has, among other things, stated that believing in the Holocaust is the same thing as claiming that Jews are special, and that it is the duty of every Christian and Muslim alike to deny what he calls the Zionist version of the Holocaust. Israel Shamir, of course, has earlier been published by the Alhambra Publishing House, which I mentioned in the beginning, and its founder, Hesham Bahari, is another figure which has appeared on Mohamed Omar's website. Here he has, in one interview, for example, stated that some kind of evil force is using Swedish media to secure its plans for world domination. Exactly who or what this evil force was not revealed in the interview itself, but an indicator might be found in an earlier interview when he described to Omar how he already in the 1990s, at a time and place where he was still a very successful publisher, and he had, of course, yet to have published any left or right-wing extreme propaganda, got the advice from an Iranian friend not to, quote, irritate the Jews, because that would surely be the end of his success. Let's see, a fourth group which have been attracted by Omar's message are the so-called truthers. One of Sweden's leading truthers is Mikael Kromsjö, and he's the founder of the website vaken.se. On this website he frequently publishes anti-Semitic material, claiming, for example, that Israel or so-called Zionists were behind the 9/11 attacks and the London bombings. He has been interviewed on Mohamed Omar's homepage, and one of the individuals which he, Mikael Kromsjö, is frequently promoting is the anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist Yuri Lina, which is one of the frequent lecturers at Omar's study circle, where he, among other things, has spoken about the Jewish aspirations for a world government. Omar has, of course, described Lina as probably Sweden's leading expert on Freemasonry. Last but not least, a fifth group must be mentioned: right-wing extremists. Already in the beginning of 2009, already in the end of 2009, when Omar announced his impending forming of the so-called Anti-Zionist party, he was very clear about the fact that he welcomed anyone who joined, who wanted to join his movement and who shared his opinions. He has also frequently stated that it's important for Islamists to keep a dialogue, as he describes it, with the right extreme movement in Sweden. And he has done so. He has interviewed a lot of them, including many Islamophobes. This is, of course, just another example of how Mohamed Omar's so-called anti-Zionist struggle is far more important to him than the well-being of his fellow Muslims. One of the individuals interviewed on Mohamed Omar's website is the party secretary of the Nationalist the National Democrats, Vadra Shuk. In this article, he echoed the notions which we already heard before, which Omar has, that mass immigration, this time not only to Sweden, but the entire Western world, is some sort of Jewish plot. Shuk seems to have returned the favor, and after this interview, Mohamed Omar has often been highlighted or even defended on the organ of the National Democrats, the Nationell Idag. Another organization which can be linked both to the National Democrats and to Omar is Nordic Youth. And especially on their, they have a website which is called nationell.nu, which regularly has portrayed Omar and his colleagues as victims of the Swedish press and often have praised their activities. last but not least, yet another group must be mentioned. It's the neo-Nazi, the Swedes party, Svenskarnas parti in Swedish, and their organ, Realist, the Realist. Especially in this newspaper, in this magazine, Omar and his closest associates, among them Vami and their fellow bigot Shamil, are regularly portrayed as victims who made the terrible mistake of irritating the Jews who allegedly controlled Swedish media. Could be of interest to point out that there are some quite clear differences between the reactions from the Swedish left and the Swedish right. I'm talking about, of course, the extreme left and the extreme right. We have earlier seen that most figures within the Swedish left have strongly condemned Mohamed Omar, and including a lot of figures which are tied to the pro-Palestinian movement, which is so closely connected to the Swedish left. And they have all distanced themselves from him. Omar, of course, has replied by calling them all Zionists. The reactions from the extreme right are somewhat different. Judging by the comments on some of the mentioned websites and the political organs, a lot of the readers are not that happy about an indirect or direct alliance with an Islamist, to say the least. But organized official criticism from the extreme right has been very scarce. Judging by this slide, one could rightly claim that this outer circle of contacts can be described as somewhat of a green, red, and brown alliance. I would finally like to conclude with a few words about the future, and start with the question: what has Omar achieved so far? We have already seen that he's what someone might call a persona non grata within the mainstream Swedish society and press. Most people have condemned him, most people have distanced themselves from him. He's obviously not forming a party, at least not for the time being. It's unclear exactly why. He's given the explanation, like I already mentioned, that he wants to concentrate on his own writing, which I personally think is it's not a convincing explanation. Let's put it that way. However, he has been successful in attracting people both from the radical right and the radical left. And judging by some of the names and the photos from the various groups he has created, for example on the internet community Facebook, one could also claim that the group, if one can call it that, young men with roots in the Middle East, is another potential breeding ground. Maybe most important and most worrying is that he has successfully created a platform where everyone who shares his ideas and his beliefs are welcome regardless of political affiliation, and this of course may turn out to be a not so pleasant surprise for the future. That was more or less it, what I wanted to say today. I would be happy to take any questions, try to answer them if I can.
Thank you very much. I have Joanne Schwartz, 1 second. Let's go around. Anna Shapira, Noah Ivry, Edward Cohen, Yusuf Hakimian, Tzim Azat, Yusuf Hakimian. Okay, so we go around then. First is Joanne.
Hi. Thank you. Very good presentation. I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, okay, so you say that he's been able to attract people from the radical left, the radical right, basically all the radical groups, the Christians, the Muslims, etc. Do you have any idea what percentage of the population he appeals to? More or less, like 10%, 20%?
No, I think it's impossible to say, but judging by the people he has attracted, which are already known from before, they are most of them are quite marginalized, at least the ones coming from the radical left. Jan Myrdal, for example, which I think of is quite marginalized. And then again, like judging by the number of members of the different groups he has been creating, the following doesn't seem to be that big. Of course, it's impossible to answer. I should probably add that if you analyze his homepage and his blog and what he's writing and saying, he's always trying to portray it as a strong force to be reckoned with, which is growing every day. Then one has to question why, for example, he hasn't formed a party.
Or enough support.
So I don't know, but it could be the case that he has been exaggerating a bit, and he I don't know.
Seems like it.
It's very hard to say how many people are following. My guess is that it's quite a small group of people right now.
And then the second question is, you say that he's been rejected from the mainstream Swedish society. Does he have any connection or does he have any support from any politicians like the governor of Malmö? Or any other politicians?
Secretly.
Or even from other countries?
I wouldn't say that any respected politician in Sweden has defended him. The
Or
one
associated with him?
I was talking about Mahmoud Al-Debi before, the head of the let's see what it's called. Sorry. Yeah, the Muslim Association of Sweden. Sorry. He some time ago tried to candidate for the Center Party in Sweden and was rejected. But that's probably as far as it goes to respected politicians. I can't think of anyone right now which has defended him, which can be taken seriously if one wants to put it that way.
Doesn't Nationaldemokraterna is en big part of them in popularity?
Nationaldemokraterna?
The Swedish
They,
Democrats. They're not the
I would say they are still quite small. You have the Swedish Democrats, which are not as radical but still quite a xenophobic party. It's a good question because there's an interesting point here. The only party on the extreme right in Sweden which have in some way criticized Mohamed Omar is the Swedes party. Many, including myself, believe that it's a way to disguise their sometimes quite Islamophobic message in a new so-called pro-Israeli dress. They have during the last year or so been wanting to promote themselves as the new pro-Israeli party.
Look, a guy like Eckhout is trying to make contacts in Israel.
Yes, that's true. But it doesn't mean that the party is representing is a good party.
No, I don't say that. But you have certainly a strong pro-Israeli wing which appears there.
That's true.
Hannah?
Actually, I have a question which relates. We covered in the blog only last week Jan Guillau's piece in Aftonbladet, where basically, if you read it between the lines, you see that he's advocating a one-state solution for Israel. So, is it just a question of window dressing? In other words, if you're like Mohamed Omar and you openly identify with very extreme, so then you're taboo, but if you somehow make yourself appear centrist, then you can come up with these sorts of statements. And there isn't a lot of criticism. I mean, in other words, he's still writing for in Aftonbladet.
Jan Guillou, you mean, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jan Guillou is a story by itself in a lot of ways. Could talk about him for hours, I think. I don't know if I want to go in so much on that, but
Also, Omar Repold with some very extreme statements.
I think that, like you said, Mohamed Omar has gone all in, and he's totally open about what he says, about what he means when he doesn't have any limitations in that way. I think his only real chance to succeed would have been if he would have toned down his message and not least try to not officially associate himself with the extreme right in Sweden. Anti-Semitism is something which is strongly condemned by everyone when it appears in the extreme right, but it is not always recognized or acknowledged as such when it comes from another way, from example within the extreme left. I've written about this in some of the articles which are published here, so I've looked a bit into that problem as well. So yeah, maybe had he chosen to do that instead, he would maybe have had a bigger chance of success, but he clearly doesn't care about what people think. He decided what he wants, and he's committed to it 100%.
Ron?
Thank you very much for your presentation. First of all, I was very impressed, especially with your command of English.
Oh, thanks. That was my biggest. That was.
Okay, so I want to.
Yeah, that's my biggest problem usually.
Not a problem. Regarding Malmo, is
Yeah.
there any evidence you have you done any research on potential involvement that he had in stoking up the sentiment when the Israeli tennis players came to Malmo and the whole saga that unwielded, or in general radicalization of the population and harassment of native Jews living in Malmo? Does he have any ties to that, or is it just his general message perhaps that certain Swedish Muslims hear that and they get enthusiastic about harassing Jews?
I haven't noticed that he, in some specific way, has been trying to get involved with the situation in Malmö specifically. He has, if I remember right, he wrote some article about what happened around the tennis game. Of course, describing it as a just cause or something like that. But I can't see any to be honest, I haven't looked into this especially, but just judging from his homepage and blog, I haven't seen any special links to what's happening in Malmö.
Never offered any statements about what later transpired with like the chanting Chayvar Chayvar Yehud and all the other.
No, I can't say that. He's very active on the internet, and his local activities is very limited to Uppsala, just the city of Uppsala more or less, where he's appearing in demonstrations, sometimes around the Stockholm area. That's what I've, as far as I can tell.
Edward?
Is Mohamed Omar and his colleagues, are they doing this work full time, or is this like a hobby?
No, only in the mornings.
If it's full time, where are they getting their funding from?
Yeah,
that's
a good.
important.
And
Follow the money.
secondly, if his father was Iranian, presumably he is a Shi'i. And does that mean he follows the Iranian line, or not necessarily? When you say he's an Islamist, is Shi'i Islamist?
Yeah. First of all, it's a very good question, the one about funding. Like I said before, he and his closest colleagues are always trying to portray this as a big and fast-growing movement, and everything they do are very successful projects. For example, the publishing house, which just has published one book, but it's still very successful. And he never, almost never at least, spills out any details of who is behind these different projects, who is funding, for example, the publishing house. This could again be one of the reasons why he has talked a lot but hasn't accomplished that much. On the other hand, we know that similar movements, for example in France, the so-called Anti-Zionist party in France, are being supported from Iran, for example. I haven't seen any indications about him being financed or something like that from Iran, but he is, to come to your second question, regularly portraying the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, as a hero. He's regularly glorifying the Iranian regime, and he is very, he's a strong follower of the Iranian line, I would say, in almost all questions. So yes, he has gone in that direction. He religiously, I would say, he's quite fond of Sufism, like Muslim mysticism, and he writes a lot about that.
Hi. Okay. First, I'd like to remind that there exists already an anti-Zionist political party in France, founded by Dieudonné. Everybody knows Dieudonné. He did it for the European elections 3, 4 weeks ago, something, and he failed completely. But still, there is a fashion of creating anti-Zionist political parties.
Yeah.
Now, you said that the mainstream political parties from the right, from the left, take distance from him, from Mohamed Omar.
Yes.
But does someone try to fight it, to write against it, to say that this man constitutes a danger to liberty, that his ideology is based upon hatred? Does anybody try to investigate the funding? Spoke about funding. I mean, or just okay, we take some distance. He's a bad man, but this is not the story. The story is completely different.
Yeah.
See, he is a real danger. For the time being, he's very small, but who knows? Hitler also started like this, and many others. And we see the same phenomenon not only in Sweden, but everywhere in Europe. This is the story. In Spain, in Greece, in France, in Belgium, everywhere. So, I mean,
yeah.
no one taking it as a danger.
I think it's quite it's quite usual in Sweden that if you have a problem, and now I'm talking about like political parties and representative of political parties, you distance yourself one time and then you more or less forget the problem. In Sweden, again, I have to point out that this is not really what I have been investigating. I can't say that I know everything about this. I have looked at his network and the people tied to him. And my impression is that not that many politicians have dealt with this problem. And I think it has some things to do with the fact that when he came out in the end of last year on public Swedish radio proclaiming that he was trying to form a party, for a few weeks, a month and a half, it was a big thing in Swedish media. A lot of people were interested, a lot of people were condemning him. But with time, and because the party never came, so to speak, it's a question which has like died out somewhat. Still, it should be pointed out again that on another level, there are people which are regularly highlighting his propaganda. You have, like I said before, anti-racist magazines like Expo and members of the Swedish Committee Against Anti-Semitism, which regularly write about Mohamed Omar, which regularly condemn him, which regularly bring up this subject and points out that he is in fact a danger which should be taken seriously.
But it encompasses only a small circle, this kind of reaction.
Yeah,
People
I would say.
who read these papers.
I would say a magazine like Expo is not uninfluential in Sweden. I would say it's very well respected. I don't know if you can say a lot, but
Yeah.
people read it, and there are also members, for example, of the Swedish Committee Against Anti-Semitism, which also have published articles in mainstream Swedish newspapers highlighting Mohamed Omar. The Swedish mainstream press is maybe a bit to be likened to the political parties in general. This is my impression, at least, because in the beginning, a lot of people wrote about Mohamed Omar. The last few months, I haven't seen that many articles about him, and yeah, the question is has somewhat disappeared a bit.
In the world of politics,
I can see how Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez call each other brothers. One is a godless Marxist and the other one is a fanatical religious person. But, you know, the common hatred of the United States and the West and others, it brings them together. But the picture that you described in Sweden, I'm a little puzzled. Are you saying, first of all, the comment, I thought that Edward Cohen said that Mohamed Omar is a Shia. That's an impossibility, because that is like naming a Jewish child Haman for Hitler. Shias don't name their children Omar, and therefore, or first name or the last name. So I like to, you know, hear a little more from you on that. And also, insofar as this movement of this array of anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist groups that you call,
Yes.
all the way from extreme left to extreme right, are they all working together, or is it just that they have a common agenda in some points, and that is hatred of the State of Israel?
First of all, your first question, I can't really answer it. I don't know exactly if it's possible or impossible for him to be a Shia. The only thing I know is that he is saying that he's a Shia, that he is constantly following the line of the Iranian regime. And as I said earlier, he's been writing a lot about Sufism. I don't know more than that. I'm sorry, I can't answer your question in another way. With the cooperation with different groups, various groups, it's a good question. Just when we talk about Mohamed Omar, as I said earlier, everyone connected to him, except the people on the extreme right, some of them, are not backed by any official organizations or big movements. The entire Swedish left has condemned him, for example. I don't see such a big cooperation. Of course, you can discuss what cooperation is. More a, like you say, more a common agenda, which, for example, appears on anti-Israeli demonstrations, where people who call themselves socialists can demonstrate together with the Nazis or Islamists without even thinking about it. But actual cooperation, I wouldn't say I have noticed that much of it, to be honest. I think it's more of a common agenda. At least in this case, it's more individuals from various groups which have, in one way or another, been attracted by his message, except for some organizations on the extreme right.
Well, I think the example of Ahmadinejad as Hugo Chavez, I think is a good one, because they are on the opposite end of the political spectrum as far as religion is concerned. Ahmadinejad goes to Chamaran and he says, the Hillel Imam told me to do the following. Okay, and then he calls Hugo Chavez his brother.
Yeah.
Okay, but politically it's possible, but I just wondered, about actual cooperation.
I would say Israel is, this is I have to say that I'm not an expert on this, but my suggestion, I would think that Israel is one of the few examples where all of these individuals can cooperate without even thinking about it. They are not cooperating in a lot of other ways, I would say. At least not like on official demonstrations and stuff like that. Israel is somehow, can be used in a lot of ways in Sweden, and most people can use it together without even thinking about it.
Sarah?
I had the same question as Edward. I just wanted to know if you knew if he had like an official job or something where he got his money from, because he doesn't have a political party, so he doesn't get aid from the government.
It's a very good question. I don't know. He's talking a lot about how he was so wealthy before he came out with this this announcing of his intending party, but how he chooses to not have this wealth and instead to say the truth. And again, that's his way of putting it. He didn't want to be a slave anymore of the mainstream Swedish establishment, and so money doesn't interest him anymore.
So basically he just writes a blog and has a website and this publishing house.
That's how he wants to portray it. I don't know who is behind it. Sorry to say. Would be very interesting.
I make a comment.
Yeah.
See, one of the things that people who know me here have heard me say many times, in the Eastern cultures, lying is very, very easy. As a matter of fact, it's part of life. So it would also be lying, and he probably is. You know that he had enormous wealth.
Sorry, you want to do
No. I would. My guess is that he had quite a lot of money before the beginning of 2009. He was everywhere, every time, and very, very well respected and sought after debater in every venue. And but of course, maybe he exaggerated that as well. But that's how he depicts it. He went from here to there financially, but the other way around morally. That's how he depicts it.
Oh, I just have to say that these things should be quite easy to find out in Sweden, in a country like Sweden, the financial part of it, like it is incomes and everything, unless they're illegal.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
That Mathan can do when he goes back to Sweden.
Yeah, that's the next problem. Yeah, exactly. You never know, like, if he gets some kind of income from somewhere.
Yeah.
So maybe it's worth it.
And another thing I was wondering if you know whether he's monitored by the sector or not?
Oh yes. Monitored.
I have no idea, but
Excuse me. I
No, I
can
don't
say
know.
yes.
By the Swedish
Yes, definitely.
CIA?
They are very much on the ball. I can say that because my husband has given some lectures in those circles, and they are very much on the ball. I was impressed. In fact, I didn't expect them to be so away,
Yeah.
but they are. They
Maybe
are.
they know where they get their money from.
Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do.
So, first of all, Mathan, I think you made a very, very clear presentation on this subject, which at best was only very vaguely known, and I think you presented it in a very clear and interesting and orderly way. I have two small questions. The first one is, usually, but I may be mistaken, and Joseph can correct that, usually Sufis aren't the greatest fanatics. Iranian Sufis, Rumi, certainly, the message is very, very different from what we hear here. And the second thing is what you said about this man, Wilhelmsson, who is linked to Palestina-Gruppen. Palestina-Gruppen is a fanatic group, but it's financed by the Swedish government, and Carl Bildt is reputed foreign minister to have said that he totally agrees with their aims. So here you have an absolute link to the heart of the Swedish system.
I would say there was a link to the heart of the Swedish system. Like I pointed out, Wilhelmsson is a former member of the Palestina-Gruppen, which is called in Swedish. And but it's a few years ago that he left them. He nowadays calls them, not surprisingly, Zionists. And yeah, like all critics are Zionists. And they have also the leading figures within the Swedish Palestina-Gruppen and Palestine movement have strongly condemned Mohamed Omar and Wilhelmsson, of course. the first question about Sufism, yes, that's also what I knew about Sufism before I started reading Mohamed Omar's blog. But he has also written a few articles where he tries to portray Sufism as something else, which can also be militant and strong, and which can which can go in the direction which he wants to promote. So he's also trying to, he turns everything around so it fits his agenda, and including Sufism. The only ways in which he writes about Sufism is how radical it is, how militant it is, and so on.
Thank you very much, Mathan. I think it was a very good presentation.
Thank you.